The last stop. The small, sleepy town of West Hollow sat nestled between thick, dark forests and rolling hills, seemingly forgotten by time. The town's charm lay in its vintage architecture, narrow streets, and the air of quiet mystery that enveloped it. It was the kind of place where everyone knew each other, and strangers were a rare sight. On a chilly autumn evening, the town was unusually lively as a group of tourists arrived for the annual Mystery Tour event. Among them were Emily and Mark, a couple in their late 20s, seeking a weekend escape from their hectic city lives. They were drawn to West Hollow by the promise of an immersive experience in a place steeped in history and folklore. The bus dropped them off at the town square, where a tour guide, a man named Henry, greeted them. Henry was a tall, gaunt figure with a voice that carried an air of theatrical mystery. He led the group through the cobblestone streets, sharing stories of the town's haunted past, mysterious disappearances, and tales of the unknown. As the tour progressed, Emily and Mark found themselves increasingly drawn to the eerie ambience of West Hollow. The stories Henry told were fascinating and unsettling, filled with accounts of unexplained phenomena and sightings of mysterious strangers. One story, in particular, stood out to them: the tale of the wandering stranger. According to local legend, the wandering stranger was a figure seen in the town during times of turmoil or impending disaster. He was described as a tall man in a dark coat and hat, with a face obscured in shadow. The legend said that those who encountered him would soon face misfortune or worse. The tour ended at the town's old inn, where the group was to stay for the night. The inn, a quaint building with creaking floors and dim lighting, exuded an old-world charm that was both inviting and unsettling. Emily and Mark checked into their room, a cozy yet somewhat eerie space with antique furnishings and a large, ornate mirror on one wall. As night fell, the couple decided to explore the inn. The hallways were dimly lit, and the air was thick with the scent of aged wood and dust. They found their way to the inn's library, a room filled with old books and peculiar artifacts. There, they met an elderly woman named Mrs. Finch, the inn's caretaker. Mrs. Finch was a kindly, soft-spoken woman with a wealth of knowledge about the town's history. She shared more stories of West Hollow, including personal accounts of strange occurrences at the inn. As they talked, Emily noticed a strange book on one of the shelves, bound in dark leather with no title. Curiosity piqued, she reached for it, but Mrs. Finch gently stopped her. "Some things are better left undisturbed," she said, her eyes serious. "This town has its secrets, and not all of them are meant to be uncovered." Emily and Mark returned to their room, intrigued and a little unnerved by the day's events. As they settled in for the night, the inn seemed to grow quieter, the silence punctuated only by the occasional creak of the building. Emily awoke in the middle of the night, a feeling of unease settling over her. She glanced at the mirror, which seemed to reflect shadows that shouldn't have been there. A sudden chill ran down her spine, and she shook Mark awake. "There's something strange about this place," she whispered, her voice trembling. Mark, still half asleep, tried to reassure her, but the uneasy feeling persisted. Suddenly, they heard a soft knock at the door. Mark got up and opened it, finding no one there. He stepped into the hallway, peering into the darkness, but it was empty. As he turned to go back inside, he noticed something out of the corner of his eye: a tall figure standing at the end of the hallway. The figure was dressed in a long, dark coat and hat, just as Henry had described. Mark felt a jolt of fear as he realized he was looking at the wandering stranger. The figure stood still, watching him, before slowly disappearing into the shadows. Mark rushed back into the room, his heart pounding. He told Emily what he had seen, and they decided to leave the inn immediately. As they packed their belongings, the atmosphere in the room seemed to grow heavier, the shadows in the mirror darkening. They hurried out of the room and down the stairs, only to find Mrs. Finch waiting for them at the front desk. Her expression was grave. "You've seen him, haven't you?" she asked quietly. Mark nodded, his fear evident. Mrs. Finch sighed. her eyes filled with a sadness that spoke of long-held secrets. "The wandering stranger is not just a legend," she said. "He is a harbinger of doom, a warning. Those who see him are often marked by tragedy." Emily and Mark were shaken but determined to leave. Mrs. Finch handed them a small, old-fashioned key. "Take this," she said. "It will open a door in the basement. You might find answers there, but be careful. The past has a way of coming back to haunt us." Despite their fear, curiosity drove Emily and Mark to the basement of the inn. The air grew colder as they descended the narrow stairs, the flickering light casting eerie shadows on the stone walls. They found the door and unlocked it, revealing a hidden room filled with old furniture, dusty books, and strange artifacts. In the center of the room was a large, ornate chest. Emily opened it, revealing a collection of journals, photographs, and a peculiar, old-fashioned key. The journals detailed the history of West Hollow and its inhabitants, including accounts of the wandering stranger and his connection to the town's mysterious events. As they read, they discovered that the stranger was not a person but a manifestation of the town's collective fear and guilt. He appeared during times of great stress, or when the townspeople faced a moral dilemma. The journals also hinted at a dark event that had been covered up long ago, something that had left a stain on the town's history. Among the items in the chest, they found a locket with a photograph of a young woman and a man, both looking eerily familiar. As they examined the photograph, they realized with a shock that the man resembled the wandering stranger. A sudden noise startled them, and they turned to see the shadowy figure of the stranger standing in the doorway. His presence filled the room with a palpable sense of dread. He raised his hand, pointing at them, and then at the photograph in Emily's hand. The room seemed to darken, and the air grew cold. The stranger's face remained hidden, but Emily felt as though he was staring directly into her soul. She clutched the locket, a sudden understanding dawning on her. "The woman in the photograph," she whispered. "It's Mrs. Finch." Mark nodded, his face pale. "And the man, he must have been her husband." They turned to the stranger, who nodded slowly before fading into the shadows once more. The room's atmosphere lightened, and they were left alone, the weight of their discovery heavy on their shoulders. Emily and Mark returned to the main floor, where they found Mrs. Finch waiting. Her eyes were filled with tears, and she nodded as they approached. "You've discovered the truth," she said softly. "My husband and I, we were deeply in love, but the town did not approve of our union. They were superstitious, fearful of anything they didn't understand. My husband, he was different, you see. He had a gift, a way of seeing things others couldn't. The town saw it as a curse." She paused, her voice trembling with emotion. "When he tried to help the town during a particularly harsh winter, they accused him of witchcraft, of bringing misfortune. They drove him away, and he disappeared. The town tried to forget, but his presence lingered. The wandering stranger is a manifestation of their guilt and fear." Emily and Mark listened, their hearts heavy with the weight of the town's past. Mrs. Finch continued, "The locket was mine, a gift from him. It holds the memory of our love and the pain of our separation. His spirit has been trying to find peace, but the town's fear and guilt have kept him bound." She handed Emily the locket. "Take this with you. Leave the town and take the story with you. Perhaps, by sharing it, you can help lift the burden from this place." Emily and Mark agreed, their minds reeling from the night's revelations. They left the inn, the locket safely tucked away, and made their way back to the bus stop. As they boarded the bus and looked back at the town, they felt a sense of closure, as though a chapter had been completed. As the bus pulled away, Emily and Mark couldn't help but feel a strange mixture of relief and sadness. They had uncovered a story that had been buried for decades, and in doing so, they had come face to face with the town's darkest secrets. The journey back was quiet, each lost in their thoughts. The experience in West Hollow had been unsettling, but it had also given them a new perspective on fear, guilt, and the power of memory. As they reached their destination, they decided to share their story, not just as a tale of horror, but as a lesson in the dangers of fear and superstition. They hoped that by doing so, they could help prevent similar tragedies in the future. The locket remained with them, a symbol of the love and pain that had bound the town's past. They knew that the story of the wandering stranger was not just a ghost story, but a reflection of human nature and the consequences of letting fear and guilt control our actions. In the end, Emily and Mark realized that some stories are meant to be told, not just to entertain, but to remind us of the importance of understanding and compassion. They hoped that their tale would encourage others to look beyond the surface, to see the truth that lies beneath, and to learn from the mistakes of the past. And so, the legend of the wandering stranger lived on, not just as a ghostly figure haunting the streets of West Hollow, but as a cautionary tale, a reminder of the darkness that can reside in the human heart and the light that can emerge when we confront our fears and seek the truth. Story 2. The Forgotten Town. In the heart of the Appalachian Mountains, nestled within a valley shrouded in mist, lay the town of Eldershade. This quaint settlement was known for its picturesque landscapes, old stone cottages, and a history that seemed to whisper secrets through the rustling leaves and crumbling cobblestones. Eldershade was a place where the past never quite let go, holding onto its mysteries like shadows clinging to the twilight. One autumn, a group of friends, Alex, Jessica, Noah, and Emily, decided to visit Eldershade after hearing about its unique charm and enigmatic folklore. They were drawn by tales of strange happenings and a promise of an adventure unlike any other. As they drove into the town, the setting sun bathed the landscape in hues of orange and gold, casting long shadows that danced along the narrow streets. Their destination was the Eldershade Inn, an establishment renowned for its vintage decor and eerie ambience. The inn was a grand old building with ivy-covered walls and tall, arched windows. As they checked in, the innkeeper, Mrs. Halloway, a woman of indeterminate age with piercing green eyes, welcomed them warmly yet with a hint of something unsaid in her gaze. "Enjoy your stay," she said, her voice smooth yet carrying a weight. "But do be mindful of the curfew." "Curfew?" Alex asked, raising an eyebrow. Mrs. Halloway nodded. "The town is quiet after dark. It's best not to wander the streets at night." Intrigued but undeterred, the friends settled into their rooms, which were furnished with antique beds, heavy drapes, and large mirrors that seemed to reflect more than just the room's interior. After unpacking, they decided to explore the town before dinner. Eldershade was a place out of time, with narrow alleyways, ancient stone bridges, and lantern-lit streets. As they wandered, they noticed the townspeople seemed friendly yet distant, their smiles not quite reaching their eyes. The group felt an undercurrent of tension, a sense that something lay beneath the town's charming facade. They found their way to a small pub, the Crooked Lantern, where they hoped to learn more about the town's history. Inside, the air was warm and filled with the scent of wood smoke and spiced cider. They struck up a conversation with the bartender, a burly man named Gus, who seemed more open than the other townsfolk. Gus told them stories of the town's founding, of the settlers who had come centuries ago, and the strange occurrences that had plagued Eldershade ever since. He spoke of disappearances, ghostly apparitions, and a mysterious figure known as the Watcher, said to appear before tragic events. "The Watcher?" Jessica asked, intrigued. "What's that about?" Gus leaned in, his voice low. "A shadowy figure, always seen at dusk. They say he watches over the town, a harbinger of doom. Those who see him are never the same." As the night wore on, the friends left the pub, the chill of the evening air seeping into their bones. The streets were deserted, and the town seemed to hold its breath. Suddenly, they noticed a figure standing at the end of the alley, barely visible in the dim light. It was tall, cloaked in shadow, and though they couldn't see its face, they felt its gaze upon them. The figure stood motionless, an unsettling presence that sent a shiver down their spines. Without a word, they hurried back to the inn, the figure's image burned into their minds. Back at the inn, they found Mrs. Halloway waiting for them, her expression unreadable. "You saw him, didn't you?" she asked, her voice a mere whisper. "The Watcher?" Noah replied, his voice trembling slightly. Mrs. Holloway nodded. "The town is under his watch. Some say he's a protector, others a curse. But always, his presence precedes something dark." Unease settled over them as they retired to their rooms. Sleep was elusive, the image of the shadowy figure haunting their thoughts. In the silence of the night, they could almost hear whispers, a soft murmur that seemed to emanate from the very walls. The next day, they decided to learn more about the Watcher, hoping to dispel the fear that had taken root in their hearts. They visited the town's library, a small but well-kept building filled with ancient books and dusty tomes. The librarian, an elderly woman named Agatha, was initially hesitant to discuss the Watcher, but eventually she relented. "The Watcher is as old as the town itself," Agatha said, her voice soft yet resonant. "Some believe he was once a man, a guardian of this valley, who made a pact to protect Eldershade from a great evil. Others say he is a specter, bound to the town by a curse." As they delved into the history of Eldershade, they discovered accounts of unexplained events, crops failing, sudden storms, and people vanishing without a trace. The Watcher was a constant presence in these tales, seen by those who were about to encounter misfortune. Despite the growing unease, the friends decided to explore the surrounding woods, curious about the legends of old. The forest was dense and shadowy, the trees towering above like silent sentinels. As they ventured deeper, the air grew colder, and the sense of being watched became palpable. They came across an old stone circle, its purpose lost to time. It was there, standing among the ancient stones, that they saw the Watcher again. The figure stood at the edge of the clearing, a dark silhouette against the fading light. This time, there was no mistaking it. They felt an intense pressure, as if the very air around them was being drawn towards the figure. Panic set in, and they fled the clearing, racing back to the town. Upon returning to the inn, they found it strangely quiet, the usual creaks and groans of the old building absent. Mrs. Holloway was waiting for them, her expression grim. "You've seen too much," she said softly. "The Watcher doesn't take kindly to curiosity." Before they could respond, a loud crash echoed through the inn. They rushed to the source, finding the library in disarray. Books were strewn across the floor, and the large mirror on the wall was shattered, the shards reflecting their shocked faces. As they stood in stunned silence, the atmosphere in the inn changed. The walls seemed to close in, the air grew heavy, and a cold wind swept through the halls. The lights flickered, casting eerie shadows that danced and twisted. Suddenly, the room filled with whispers, disembodied voices that spoke in a language they couldn't understand. The friends huddled together, fear gripping their hearts as the temperature dropped further. Then, as quickly as it had begun, the phenomenon ceased. The inn returned to its usual state, though the damage remained. Mrs. Holloway appeared, her face pale and drawn. "He is here," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The Watcher is trying to protect something, or perhaps someone. This town has many secrets, and not all of them are meant to be uncovered." Determined to find answers, the friends decided to confront the Watcher. They gathered supplies and made their way back to the stone circle in the woods, their resolve steeled by fear and curiosity. As they approached the circle, the air grew cold, and a thick fog began to rise, obscuring their view. The Watcher stood in the center of the circle, a commanding presence that seemed to absorb the light around him. "Why are you here?" Jessica called out, her voice shaking. "What do you want?" The Watcher remained silent, but the fog around him began to swirl, revealing glimpses of the past. They saw visions of the town's early days, of settlers and a man who resembled the Watcher, but younger, more human. He was a protector, guiding the settlers and warding off threats. Then the visions changed, showing the man being betrayed by the townspeople, accused of witchcraft and cast out. He made a pact with a dark force, sacrificing his humanity to protect the town from an even greater evil that lurked in the shadows. The friends realized that the Watcher was not a malevolent spirit but a guardian, bound by a curse to protect the town. His presence heralded danger, but not from him, from the ancient evil he had sworn to contain. Suddenly, the fog thickened, and a chill ran through the air. They felt a dark presence, something ancient and malevolent, watching them from the shadows. The ground beneath them shook, and the stone circle began to crumble. The Watcher raised his hand, and the fog swirled around them, creating a barrier. He spoke for the first time, his voice echoing through the clearing. "Leave this place. The darkness is awakening. You must not interfere." Understanding the gravity of the situation, the friends fled the clearing, the fog guiding them back to the town. As they reached the edge of the forest, they saw the first signs of dawn breaking over the horizon. Back at the inn, Mrs. Holloway was waiting for them, her expression a mix of relief and fear. "You must leave Eldershade," she urged. "The darkness you have seen is real, and it seeks to break free. The Watcher has kept it at bay for centuries, but your presence has disturbed the balance." Realizing the danger they had unwittingly unleashed, the friends quickly packed their belongings and prepared to leave. As they drove out of Eldershade, the town faded into the mist, leaving behind a lingering sense of unease. They never spoke of what they had seen, understanding that some stories were better left untold. But they knew that Eldershade would remain, a place out of time, guarded by a spectral figure whose vigil would never end. As they returned to their normal lives, the memory of the Watcher's gaze haunted them, a reminder of the mysteries that lurk in the shadows of the world. They had glimpsed the unknown, touched the edge of a reality that defied explanation, and emerged with a deeper understanding of the darkness that lies within and without. And somewhere, in the mist-shrouded valley of Eldershade, the Watcher continued his lonely vigil, guarding the town against the ancient evil that threatened to rise once more, bound by a curse and a duty that time could not erase. Story 3. The Silent Village. In the remote reaches of the Carpathian Mountains, nestled deep within a dense, ancient forest, lay the village of Dorca. This isolated settlement was known only to a few, whispered about in hushed tones, and avoided by those who valued their peace of mind. The village, forgotten by time and civilization, was said to be cursed, a place where shadows whispered and silence spoke louder than words. One winter, a group of friends, David, Anna, Lucas, and Sarah, set out on a hiking expedition into the Carpathians, seeking adventure and a break from their monotonous city lives. They were drawn by stories of the region's beauty and the mysterious, uncharted paths that few dared to tread. Among these paths was one that led to the fabled village of Dorca, a place shrouded in mystery and foreboding tales of disappearances and spectral encounters. Ignoring the warnings of the locals, who spoke of Dorca as a place of sorrow and fear, the group ventured forth, curiosity outweighing caution. As they trekked deeper into the forest, the trees grew taller and the underbrush denser, casting an eerie twilight even at midday. A thick fog began to settle, muffling sounds and creating an otherworldly ambience. After hours of navigating the increasingly treacherous terrain, they stumbled upon Dorca. The village, seemingly abandoned, appeared out of the fog like a spectral apparition. Stone houses with moss-covered roofs lined cobbled streets, and a chilling silence permeated the air, broken only by the distant cawing of crows. The friends entered the village, finding it untouched by time, yet eerily devoid of life. The houses were fully furnished, as if the occupants had left in haste, leaving behind meals on tables, clothes draped over chairs, and fires long extinguished. It was as if time had frozen, capturing the final moments of a vanished people. Intrigued and unnerved, the group decided to investigate further, splitting up to explore different parts of the village. David and Sarah made their way to the village square, dominated by an ancient well and an old stone church, its steeple looming ominously against the darkening sky. Anna and Lucas headed toward a large manor house at the edge of the village, drawn by its grandeur and the promise of uncovering clues to the village's mysterious abandonment. Inside the manor, Anna and Lucas found rooms filled with antiques and dust-covered portraits. The air was thick with the scent of mildew and decay, and the wood floors creaked underfoot. As they moved through the house, they felt a growing sense of unease, as if they were being watched by unseen eyes. Meanwhile, in the church, David and Sarah discovered an altar adorned with strange symbols and an ancient book bound in leather and iron chains. The book exuded an aura of malevolence, its cover etched with cryptic runes. Overcome by curiosity, David reached out to touch it, but as his fingers brushed the cover, the chains rattled and fell away, the book opening on its own. The pages flipped rapidly, stopping on an illustration of a monstrous figure, a creature with elongated limbs, hollow eyes, and a mouth twisted in a silent scream. As they stared, a low, guttural growl echoed through the church, and a cold wind swept through, extinguishing the candles and plunging the room into darkness. Panic set in as they rushed outside, only to find the village transformed. The fog had thickened, swallowing the landscape, and the once silent air was now filled with distant, anguished wails and the sound of footsteps echoing in the empty streets. The atmosphere was oppressive, the fog pressing in on them like a living entity. Anna and Lucas, alerted by the commotion, joined David and Sarah in the square. As they huddled together, trying to make sense of the surreal events, they noticed a figure standing at the edge of the fog, shrouded in darkness. The figure was tall, its form barely discernible in the gloom, but they could feel its gaze upon them, cold and piercing. The figure raised a hand, and the fog parted, revealing the desolate streets of Dorca. The friends felt a compulsion to follow, as if drawn by an unseen force. They walked in silence, the fog swirling around them, leading them to the old manor house where Anna and Lucas had been. Inside, they found a hidden chamber, its walls lined with ancient manuscripts and artifacts. At the center stood a stone pedestal, upon which rested an ornate mirror, its surface tarnished and cracked. The mirror seemed to pulse with an inner light, casting an eerie glow that illuminated the chamber. As they approached, the mirror's surface cleared, revealing not their reflections but scenes from the past. They saw the villagers of Dorca, gathered in the square, fear etched on their faces. The scene shifted, showing a man, tall, gaunt, and dressed in old-fashioned clothing, standing before them. The friends realized with growing horror that this was the figure they had seen in the fog. The man spoke, his voice echoing from the mirror, recounting a tale of woe and betrayal. He had been a guardian of the village, entrusted with protecting a powerful relic, a tome bound in chains, containing knowledge of the Watchers, ancient spirits bound to the land. The villagers, fearing the power of the relic and the man's knowledge, had betrayed him, seeking to destroy the book and rid themselves of its curse. In a final act of desperation, the man had used the book's power to curse the village, binding the Watchers to Dorca and condemning the villagers to an eternal limbo, trapped between life and death. The man became the first Watcher, a guardian of the curse, ensuring that no one disturbed the relic or the village's dark secret. As the vision faded, the friends were left with the realization that they had unwittingly become part of Dorca's cursed history. The fog thickened once more, and the temperature dropped, frost forming on the walls of the chamber. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, as shadows began to coalesce into solid forms. Tall, slender figures with featureless faces and eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. The Watchers had arrived, drawn by the friends' fear and the disturbance of the relic. The air grew heavy, and the friends felt an overwhelming pressure, a force that seemed to pull at their very souls. The whispers became a cacophony, filling their minds with visions of despair and doom. David, trying to find a way to escape, remembered the old man's words about appeasing the Watchers. Desperate, he reached out to the mirror, offering his courage, the trait that had always defined him. The mirror's surface shimmered, and David felt a wrenching pain as his courage was torn from him, leaving him hollow and broken. The Watchers enveloped him, and he disappeared into the shadows. Anna, seeing David's fate, was paralyzed with fear. In her final moments, she offered her voice, the gift she cherished as a singer. The Watchers accepted, and Anna fell silent, her voice gone, her eyes empty. She too was claimed by the shadows. Lucas, realizing the price they had to pay, offered his memories of a loved one, a sacrifice that left him lost and empty. The Watchers took him, leaving only Sarah, trembling and alone. Sarah, with nothing left to give, faced the Watchers, her mind filled with the knowledge of the village's curse and the fate that awaited her. In a final act of defiance, she reached for the tome, hoping to reseal it and break the curse. But as she touched the book, the chains reappeared, binding her to it. The Watchers closed in, their whispers filling her mind with darkness. As the fog swallowed the village, Dorca fell silent once more. The curse remained unbroken, the village waiting for the next souls to wander into its grasp, unaware of the price they would pay. The friends were never seen again, their fate a chilling reminder of the darkness that can lie hidden in the most unexpected places, waiting for those who dare to disturb its slumber. The village of Dorca became a legend, a place of sorrow and fear, whispered about in stories and warnings. The Watchers continued their eternal vigil, bound to the land and the relic that held their curse. And somewhere in the depths of the forest, the tome lay waiting, its secrets sealed by chains of iron and sorrow, a reminder of the darkness that can consume even the brightest of lights. Story 4. The Forgotten Asylum. In the outskirts of a small, unremarkable town, hidden behind a thick wall of ancient oaks, lay the remnants of St. Helena's Asylum. Abandoned for decades, the asylum had become the stuff of local legend, a place where whispers of madness and suffering still lingered in the halls. Few dared to venture near, deterred by tales of ghostly apparitions, unexplained noises, and a pervasive sense of dread. One cold October night, a group of thrill-seekers, Ethan, Claire, Ryan, and Mia, decided to explore the decaying asylum. They were drawn by the thrill of the unknown and a desire to experience the supernatural stories firsthand. Armed with flashlights and a camera to document their adventure, they approached the rusting gates, the wind howling through the trees like a warning. The asylum loomed before them, a hulking structure of crumbling brick and shattered windows. The air around it was thick with an eerie stillness, as if the very ground was holding its breath. The friends pushed open the creaking gates, their footsteps echoing on the cracked concrete as they entered the courtyard. Above them, the main building rose like a dark specter against the moonlit sky, its facade marred by time and neglect. Inside, the asylum was a maze of dimly lit corridors, peeling paint, and the remnants of forgotten lives. Old medical equipment, broken furniture, and faded photographs littered the floor, creating a chaotic tableau of the past. The air was stale, carrying the faint scent of mold and decay, and every sound seemed amplified in the oppressive silence. As they explored, they felt an unsettling presence, as if they were being watched by unseen eyes. The temperature dropped, and a chill settled over them, raising goosebumps on their skin. They tried to shake off the feeling, attributing it to the creepy environment, but the sense of being followed persisted. In one of the rooms, they found an old leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed and brittle. Curious, Claire opened it, revealing a doctor's notes dated back to the 1940s. The entries detailed the treatment of patients deemed criminally insane, subjected to cruel and experimental therapies. One name appeared frequently, Patient 237, a woman who had been committed for violent outbursts and claimed to hear voices. The journal described increasingly desperate attempts to cure Patient 237, including isolation, electroshock therapy, and lobotomies. The final entry was short and chilling. Patient 237 unresponsive. No hope for recovery. facility to be closed due to unsustainable conditions. As they read, a soft, almost imperceptible sound filled the room, a faint humming like a distant lullaby. The friends exchanged uneasy glances, the atmosphere growing heavier. They decided to continue their exploration, hoping to find more clues about the asylum's dark history. In the basement, they stumbled upon a door marked "Restricted." The lock was broken, and with a sense of trepidation, they pushed it open. Inside, they found a row of cells, their metal bars rusted and walls stained with something dark and indelible. The air was colder here, and the humming grew louder, more distinct. At the far end of the row, one cell stood out, its door ajar, the darkness within impenetrable. As they approached, the humming stopped, replaced by a faint whispering that seemed to come from the very walls. Ryan, unable to contain his curiosity, stepped inside, shining his flashlight into the cell. The light revealed a small, bare room, except for a single chair in the center, its leather straps worn and frayed. On the walls, crudely scratched into the plaster, were hundreds of tally marks, alongside words that sent chills down their spines. "She watches, never alone," and "The voice won't stop." Suddenly, the door to the cell slammed shut with a deafening clang, trapping Ryan inside. The friends screamed and rushed to open it, but it was stuck fast, as if held by an unseen force. Inside, Ryan's flashlight flickered and went out, plunging him into darkness. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, filling his mind with unintelligible phrases and a sense of impending doom. In the pitch black, Ryan felt something brush against him, a cold, clammy sensation that sent him into a panic. He pounded on the door, shouting for help, but the sound seemed to be swallowed by the oppressive darkness. The whispers crescendoed into a cacophony, and through the noise, he heard a distinct voice, clear and cold, "You are mine now." Outside, the others frantically tried to force the door open. Ethan, with a surge of adrenaline, managed to kick it ajar, and they pulled Ryan out. His face was pale, his eyes wide with terror, and he muttered incoherently about voices and shadows. As they dragged him to safety, the friends noticed a figure standing at the end of the corridor, a woman in a tattered hospital gown, her eyes hollow and her expression blank. The figure stared at them, unmoving, as if waiting for something. Then, as quickly as she had appeared, she vanished, leaving behind an icy chill. The friends, gripped by fear, decided to leave immediately, but the asylum seemed to have other plans. The hallways twisted and turned, leading them in circles. Doors that had been open were now locked, and the fog outside had thickened, obscuring the windows and plunging the interior into darkness. The whispers followed them, a constant murmur that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. As they struggled to find an exit, they stumbled into the main treatment room, a large, sterile space filled with old operating tables and rusted medical instruments. In the center of the room stood a large metal cabinet, its doors slightly ajar. Ethan, driven by a desperate need to understand what was happening, opened the cabinet. Inside, they found a collection of old files, photographs, and a reel of film. The photographs were of patients, their faces contorted in expressions of fear and pain. Among them was patient 237, her eyes haunting and her mouth twisted in a silent scream. The film reel was labeled Session 237, Final Procedure. Against their better judgment, they decided to play the film, hoping it would provide answers. The projector whirred to life, casting flickering images on the wall. The film was grainy and distorted, but it showed a woman strapped to a chair, electrodes attached to her head. Doctors in white coats stood around her, their faces masked and impassive. The woman thrashed and screamed, the sound muted by the film. As the doctors administered a shock, the screen flickered, and the woman's screams grew louder, more frantic. The scene changed, showing the aftermath. Patient 237 slumped in the chair, her eyes vacant, her mouth moving as if in prayer or supplication. The doctors were gone, and the room was empty, save for her whispering voice, repeating a phrase over and over. She watches from the shadows. As the film ended, the room plunged into darkness, the projector sputtering and dying. The friends were left in silence, the air heavy with the weight of what they had seen. Suddenly, the temperature dropped, and they felt a presence, cold and malevolent, closing in around them. The whispers returned, louder and more insistent, echoing off the walls. They heard Ryan's voice, filled with terror, and then his scream, a sound so full of anguish and fear that it seemed to pierce the very air. When the lights flickered back on, Ryan was gone, and in his place stood the ghostly figure of the woman they had seen earlier, her eyes burning with a cold, otherworldly light. The friends backed away, but the woman raised a hand, and the whispers intensified, filling their minds with darkness. They felt an overwhelming compulsion to obey, to stay and listen to the voices. The woman moved closer, her form flickering like a shadow, her gaze fixed on them with an intensity that burned into their souls. Ethan, fighting the urge to succumb, grabbed Claire's hand and pulled her toward the door. They had to escape, to get out of this place before it consumed them. As they ran, they felt the presence following them, the whispers growing fainter but never fading entirely. They burst out of the asylum into the cold night air, the fog swirling around them. The gate, which had seemed so far away, was now just a few steps ahead. They pushed through, the heavy iron scraping against the ground, and fled into the woods. As they ran, they heard the whispers fading, the oppressive weight lifting from their minds. But even as they escaped the physical confines of the asylum, they knew they were not truly free. The whispers, the presence, and the terror of that night would follow them, haunting their dreams and memories. St. Helena's asylum remained, a silent witness to the horrors that had unfolded within its walls. The whispers and shadows continued their eternal vigil, waiting for the next souls to disturb their restless slumber. And somewhere, in the depths of the asylum, patient 237 watched and waited, her whispers a lament for all who had been lost to the darkness. The town returned to its quiet existence, the stories of the asylum fading into legend. But the friends, marked by their encounter, knew the truth, that some places are haunted not just by spirits, but by the echoes of suffering and despair. And some stories are better left untold, lest they awaken the darkness that lies within us all. Story 5. The Shadow of Hollow Creek. In the heart of the Ozark Mountains, where the forest was thick and the night seemed to stretch endlessly, there was a town forgotten by time, Hollow Creek. The town was shrouded in mystery, its history marked by strange disappearances and unexplainable events. Few dared to venture there, and those who did rarely spoke of what they found. One brisk autumn evening, a group of friends, Tom, Lisa, Mike, and Rachel, set out on a road trip, eager to escape their mundane routines. They had heard whispers of Hollow Creek, of its haunted woods and the old mansion that stood on the outskirts of town. Driven by curiosity and the thrill of adventure, they decided to find it, despite the warnings from locals at a nearby gas station. People go there, but they don't come back the same, the gas station attendant had said, his eyes clouded with fear. If they come back at all. Ignoring the warnings, the friends continued their journey, the dense forest soon enveloping their car. The road twisted and turned, the trees closing in, their branches like skeletal fingers against the fading light. As they approached Hollow Creek, a thick fog rolled in, reducing visibility to mere feet ahead. They finally arrived in Hollow Creek as night fell, the town eerily silent and seemingly abandoned. The streets were empty, the houses dark, and the air was filled with an oppressive stillness. The friends decided to explore, starting with the mansion, hoping to uncover the secrets that lay within its decaying walls. The mansion, a Victorian-era relic, loomed over the town, its once grand facade now weathered and overgrown with ivy. The windows were dark, and the front door creaked ominously as they pushed it open. Inside, The air was musty and cold, the floorboards groaning under their weight. The faint smell of decay lingered, mixed with the scent of old wood and dust. Their flashlights cut through the darkness, revealing a grand staircase, ornate chandeliers, and portraits of stern-faced ancestors lining the walls. They began their exploration, each room revealing glimpses of the mansion's former grandeur and the decay that had set in over the years. In the library, they found old books filled with strange symbols and handwritten journals detailing the town's history. The journals spoke of a curse, of a shadow that had fallen over Hollow Creek, bringing with it madness and death. The last entry, dated over a century ago, mentioned a ritual to contain the darkness, but it had been interrupted, leaving the town vulnerable. As they read, the temperature dropped and the air grew heavy. A sense of unease washed over them as they heard a faint whisper, barely audible, yet sending chills down their spines. The whisper grew louder, more insistent, filling the room with a cacophony of voices, all speaking in a language they couldn't understand. Panic set in as they realized they were not alone. Shadows flickered at the edge of their vision, moving with a life of their own. The friends decided to leave the mansion, but as they turned to exit, the front door slammed shut with a deafening bang, trapping them inside. Desperate, they ran through the mansion, trying to find another way out. The shadows grew bolder, taking on more defined shapes. Twisted figures with hollow eyes and mouths stretched in silent screams. The walls seemed to close in, the air thick with malevolence. They stumbled upon a hidden staircase leading down to the basement. With no other option, they descended, the darkness growing thicker with each step. The basement was a labyrinth of corridors and rooms, the air damp and cold. They found a large chamber at the center, filled with strange symbols etched into the stone floor and walls. In the center of the chamber stood an altar, and on it lay an ancient book, bound in leather and secured with iron chains. The book pulsed with a dark energy, the source of the town's curse. As they approached, the shadows converged, forming a barrier between them and the altar. Tom, determined to end the nightmare, reached out to the book. The shadows surged, but as his fingers brushed the cover, a searing pain shot through him, forcing him to pull back. The whispers grew louder, the shadows pressing closer, their forms more solid and terrifying. Lisa, seeing Tom struggle, recalled the journals they had found. "The ritual," she shouted over the din. "We need to complete the ritual." They frantically searched the chamber, finding the items mentioned in the journals: a dagger, a bowl, and several candles. With trembling hands, they arranged the items on the altar, following the instructions as best they could. As they lit the candles and began the incantation, the shadows writhed and twisted, their whispers turning into screams of rage. The book's chains rattled and fell away, the cover opening to reveal pages filled with dark, arcane symbols. The ground shook, and the air crackled with energy as they chanted the final words of the ritual. The shadows screamed, a sound that echoed through the chamber and reverberated in their bones. A blinding light filled the room, and then silence. When the light faded, the shadows were gone, the air clear and still. The book lay open on the altar, its pages blank, the curse broken. Exhausted and shaken, the friends made their way back upstairs, finding the front door of the mansion wide open. As they stepped outside, the fog began to lift, revealing the town bathed in the light of the rising sun. The oppressive atmosphere had lifted, the air fresh and clear. They hurried to their car, eager to leave Hollow Creek behind. As they drove away, they couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The forest seemed to close in on them, the trees whispering secrets they couldn't hear. They vowed never to speak of what had happened, hoping to leave the horrors of Hollow Creek in the past. But as they reached the edge of the forest, they saw a figure standing in the road ahead. A tall, shadowy figure with hollow eyes and a mouth twisted in a silent scream. The car skidded to a stop, and when they looked again, the figure was gone. The friends left the mountains, but the experience left a mark on them. a darkness that followed them wherever they went. They had survived Hollow Creek, but they knew that some shadows could never be escaped, only endured. Back in the city, they tried to return to their normal lives, but something had changed. Tom was haunted by nightmares of the mansion and the shadows that lurked within. Lisa found herself drawn to old books and symbols, obsessed with understanding the rituals they had performed. Mike and Rachel, once carefree and full of laughter, grew quiet and withdrawn, shadows of their former selves. Weeks turned into months, and the friends began to drift apart, each consumed by their own fears and obsessions. Tom's nightmares grew more vivid, the shadows more persistent. He saw them in the corners of his vision, felt their cold presence when he was alone. He knew that they had brought something back with them from Hollow Creek, something dark and insidious. Lisa, too, felt the pull of the shadows. She spent hours in libraries, researching ancient texts and occult practices, desperate to find a way to rid themselves of the darkness that clung to them. Her once bright eyes grew dull, her skin pale, as if the life was being drained from her. Mike and Rachel, unable to cope with the lingering fear, tried to bury the memories of Hollow Creek, but the shadows found them in their dreams. They grew distant from each other, the shared experience that had once bonded them now a source of terror and isolation. As the anniversary of their visit to Hollow Creek approached, Tom felt a growing sense of dread. He knew that they needed to confront the shadows, to find a way to banish them once and for all. He reached out to the others, and they reluctantly agreed to meet, each feeling the same weight of impending doom. They gathered in Tom's apartment, the atmosphere tense and heavy. Lisa brought the books she had found, spreading them out on the table. They pored over the pages, searching for answers, for a way to undo the curse they had unleashed. As they worked late into the night, the shadows began to creep into the room, the air growing colder and the lights flickering. The friends felt a familiar sense of dread, the same malevolent presence they had felt in the mansion's basement. Desperation drove them to try another ritual, one that Lisa had discovered in an obscure text. They gathered the necessary items, a mirror, a candle, and a knife, and began to chant the incantation. The shadows surged, filling the room with darkness, their whispers rising to a deafening roar. The mirror's surface shimmered, reflecting not their faces but the twisted figures of the shadows, their hollow eyes burning with a cold, malevolent light. The friends continued the ritual, their voices shaking but determined. As they reached the climax of the chant, the shadows screamed, a sound of pure agony and rage. The mirror shattered, and the room was plunged into darkness. When the light returned, the shadows were gone, the air clear and still. The friends, exhausted and shaken, looked at each other, relief washing over them. But the relief was short-lived. The shadows had been banished, but the darkness they had brought back from Hollow Creek remained, a stain on their souls. They had survived, but they were forever changed, haunted by the knowledge of what lay beyond the veil of reality. As they left Tom's apartment, they knew that they could never escape the memories of Hollow Creek. The shadows might be gone, but the darkness would always be a part of them, a reminder of the price of curiosity and the dangers of meddling with forces beyond their understanding. And somewhere, deep in the heart of the Ozark Mountains, the town of Hollow Creek remained, a place of shadows and secrets, waiting for the next souls to stumble into its grasp. The mansion stood silent, its walls bearing witness to the horrors within, the shadows biding their time, patient and eternal, ready to claim the unwary and the curious once more.